Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Donald Wallenfang. Thank you for joining me on this live stream entitled Jean-Luc Marion, Erotic Phenomenology and the Advance of the Lover. So, getting into the thick of his book, The Erotic Phenomenon, section uh, 18, especially, the advance of the lover. So we've been following Jean-Luc Marion and the development of his argument, positioning love as first philosophy, love as the prized fruit of the phenomenological reduction, love as one of the most fascinating, interesting, if not the most significant phenomena that phenomenology can investigate, deal with, and work to describe and interpret through this method of phenomenology. So we resume our discussion thinking about the courage necessary to enter the erotic reduction and to expose oneself to so much risk, so much loss, as Marion talks about the amorous loss, and the need for courage, for fortitude to enter this reduction, facing all the stages of the erotic contradiction, like Don Juan, the literary figure Don Juan, not a perfect figure at all, but what Marion observes about him is his commitment to love, to woo the beloved, to woo the beloved. At least Don Juan concerns himself with love. He's not so much focused on money, on even pleasure, but it's like for Don Juan, as the literature goes, the history of his character goes, apparently he wooed like 1,000 women, and that's not something to be proud of, we would say. But Marion is looking at the phenomenality of Don Juan's intentionality to love, even though it's in a distorted form of seduction most often. Nevertheless, there's a consistency. The consistency of the character of Don Juan as the lover, as the one who pursues the adventure of love, the risk of love, even in the end dying for his love for Doña Ana, and as the story goes, pulled to hell, tethered to a statue of her father, who he killed in order to um, accomplish his erotic advance toward Doña Ana. So this is a fascinating literary story that says so much about common lived experience about our humanity. And Don Juan, Marion says, it's unfortunate, however, that he practices the erotic reduction solely in the mode of seduction. And the problem with seduction, Marion says, is the advance of the lover collapses due to possession's betrayal of the erotic reduction and only mimics the lover's love. So there's a collapse in the phenomenality of seduction. There's a collapse of the erotic phenomenon, even if it might begin as this erotic departure of the self toward the other, toward the beloved. There's a collapse when the lover tries to possess the beloved, tries to treat the beloved like a project, to seduce the other. And this is where love collapses. It's no longer bearing the character of the infinite. So seduction dries up, the deluge of true love. The pleasure of seduction is solitary. Either you play the other or you get played. That's how it works. This pleasure of seduction. And so, what seduction, its givenness, its signification, which is different than what Marion is calling the erotic phenomenon. The phenomenality of seduction involves not a communion in the end, but the solitude of self gratification through this simulation of seduction. And this is something quite different than a sincere gift of oneself as the lover, given at a loss to the beloved without expecting anything in return. This is something quite different. So, the problematics of love, Marion is pointing out, involves treating love like so many other human activities, like seeking pleasure in so many different ways. I'm going to go get my pleasure, get my satisfaction, get my fix, and treating love like a drug. Even Kesha, the artist, has a song, Your Love is My Drug. And when this happens, there's a collapse of the erotic reduction. It collapses in seduction. It collapses in regard for the beloved as object. Regard for the beloved become project. And this is not quite the erotic phenomenon. But in contrast, the inexhaustible advance of the lover. Notice Marion's language, the inexhaustible advance of the lover. Why can love be inexhaustible? Inasmuch as it proceeds from the infinite, the elsewhere of the infinite, the otherwise than the infinite. And alterity, the other who faces me, signifies this elsewhere, this infinite. So again, Marion's philosophy depends a lot on that of Emmanuel Levinas to establish these categories. Um, okay, so yeah, Marion is going further than Don Juan, further than, as you say in the comments, a libertine seducer. He's lifting up Don Juan to show we have a beginning here with a consistent intentionality of love, and someone who concerns himself and his life with all of his time to pursue a beloved. And so Don Juan shows not only consistency but perseverance in this advance of the lover, even though it collapses into the projects of seduction and then ultimately using the other. But in contrast, the inexhaustible advance of the lover swells in proportion to its imbalance and resolve not to fall. Possession is renounced as the advance requires a permanent fresh start. So, whenever the lover approaches the beloved trying to possess her, or she trying to possess him, the issue here is that there will be a collapse of the erotic reduction and a forfeiture of the infinite beginnings of the advance. And so possession is problematic for the passion of the lover. Possession needs to be renounced as the advance of the lover requires a permanent fresh start. A permanent fresh start. And so this is a paradox, the permanence of beginning again and again and again. This is the advance of the lover. So the advance of the lover is not meant to let up, but rather it's meant to gather momentum and is meant to renounce every threat of the collapse of the advance. When love stops trying, love withers up. Love has to try and try and try. Even St. Teresa of Avila says that love is never idle. It's either increasing or decreasing. Love is not content to remain the same. So, to talk about a permanence of the fresh start of the advance, always beginning, always loving again, always choosing to love again and again. And we have this experience from wakefulness to sleep, wakefulness to sleep. There's a freshness of waking up and facing a new day, a new morning, a new time to love, a new opportunity to make love, which is to make time, which involves an affirmative response to the loveworthiness of the other, the beloved. For the advance of the lover, each accomplishment becomes a new beginning. So each accomplishment itself is a new start. If I accomplished loving, it itself is reason to begin again. This is the logic of love, the amorous loss of love that does not interpret what's happening as I'm winning a contest, I'm gaining a trophy to put on the shelf. Genuine love does not treat the beloved like a dime a dozen, like one among many. This is the difference between love and lust, between promise and promiscuity, between covenant and um, conceit, counterfeit. So, the erotic reduction is accomplished by never ceasing to repeat itself. The ego must be perpetually decentered to perform a definitive advance in which a single unique other suffices in principle and superabundantly. One unique other suffices in principle and superabundantly to serve as the beloved, to signify the beloved. For the advance of the lover to repeat, to reinaugurate its movements toward the beloved, we don't need many beloveds. We don't, like Don Juan, need many projects of seduction. But what Marion is getting at is the truth, the clarity through the method of phenomenology, the clarity of the intentionality of love, of the act of loving, loves best when there is only one beloved. Why is this? Because what Marion is getting at is to say the advance of the lover depends not on an anonymous, generic alterity of the beloved, but the advance of the lover really depends on the uniqueness of this one here, this beloved here, the uniqueness, unrepeatability, incommunicability of this beloved here, this one. This one is enough because this beloved signifies superabundantly. This signification of the unique beloved is superabundant, so there's no need to go looking for another one. This is the whole premise of uh, monogamy. Monogamous lifelong marriage is based on this premise. You can marry one because you don't need to go looking for a second, a third, a fourth. The one is plentiful. The one is enough for the advance of the lover. Again, this is not a question of quantity, but yes, we could say rather a question of quality. And when you eat the savory dish, this is a careful and insufficient analogy. But when you eat a delicious dish, you don't need a second one, you don't need a third one. You're complete with the one. And so it is with love in terms of the lover and the beloved. There is a perfection, a superabundant perfection of signification proceeding from the uniqueness of this beloved, this other. This other, as beloved, is confirmed as infinite inasmuch as she incessantly provokes me to love first and last. I can't imagine living without her. This is the concept, this is the idea. The uniqueness of the beloved provokes me to love first and last. And inasmuch as she alone, by herself, through her sovereign autonomy and uniqueness, provokes me in this way, she alone um, initiates through her call, through her belovedness, the advance of my loving her. And this is so amazing. This point is so revolutionary. It's very paradoxical, but it's so counterintuitive to the typical way of understanding love and the alleged erotic phenomena of lived experience. So, let me just read a passage where Marion is talking about this on page 84 of his book, The Erotic Phenomenon. So, Marion says, "It is the end of the advance that makes the other finite, rather than any finitude of the other justifying the end of the advance." So, through my incessant advance, loving the beloved, this affirms all the more her infinitude, the infinite transubstantiated, to use a rather metaphysical term, the infinite transubstantiated in the person of the beloved, the infinite escaped. It gives itself through the uniqueness of her and the alterity of the relational distance between us that's meant to be traversed through the gift of love, this hermeneutics of gift. So the other becomes finite for me because she enters little by little as my advance diminishes into my field of vision, is immobilized there, and ends up by facing me massively, frontally, objectively, instead of remaining the vanishing point that I aimed at in the advance without truly seeing it or ever comprehending it. So what Marion is saying here is when the erotic reduction collapses into something like seduction, something like lust, treating a relationship like a project, or like a kind of commodity. Then the alterity of the other diminishes, my advance diminishes, the aesthetics of the relationship diminishes, and it's what's required of the beloved is to signify a vanishing point where I can't put her on the screen, that a picture never will do her justice, a video will never do her justice. Um, that it's in, this is talking about the phenomenality of relationship here. And if we really contemplate what's going on in the phenomenality of relationship and what Marion is talking about with the advance of the lover, the advance never quits because the givenness of the beloved never quits. The givenness of the beloved comes both as presence and absence. And it's this renewed absence as well as the renewed presence that supplies this vanishing point that continues to activate the intentionality of love of the lover, of the perpetual advance of the lover. So if I'm serious about the question, as Marion suggests, it's a good idea. Can I love first? How can I be, I want to say certain, but how can I be assured that I can keep loving first? Marion is describing the fullness of this phenomenality of the erotic phenomenon, which requires the beloved not to be reified into an object, not to be diminished as a means to an end, an object of use, not to be even idolized into a mute and static token of beauty, but that the beloved remains personal through and through, that there's an iconicity within the relationship, so that when I look at her, she is looking out at me, and her look, her gaze, provokes my advance as the lover, as does her turning away her gaze from me, and to win her affection again and again. Uh, this movement, and keeping it real, even within a marriage relationship, where there's times for the conjugal act to take place, but most of the time it's not taking place. And the times of abstinence are just, if not more significant, for the advance of the lover than the times of consummation. This is a great insight for love. This is a tremendous insight for love that so often goes lacking in the perennial sad collapse of the erotic reduction in so many relationships. So, if the advance were to end, the other, the beloved, would be rendered finite, an object to possess, a means to some other finite impersonal end. So, going back to Don Juan, the seducer, Marion appreciates at first the character, but then will go to critique the collapse of the erotic reduction in Don Juan. So Don Juan, the seducer, loves too little because he does not hold out his desire the entire distance. Don Juan, in the end, actually loves too little because his desire collapses with each new love affair. It, to say that she wasn't enough is to miss the mark as a lover, is to fail in the perpetual advance of the lover. She was enough. She always already was enough. You didn't need to go looking somewhere else. So this goes back to the phenomenology of the gift, the purity of the gift. When there is the encounter of the purity of the gift, this is enough. Especially when we're talking about the resonance of the infinite, the trace of the infinite within the gift, within the signification of the alterity of the other. I don't need to go looking for another one, because uh, the signification of the infinite as such is not a multiplication of the one, but a perpetuation of the glory of the one. So this is what Marion is getting at, and what Don Juan misses. He loves too little because he does not hold out his desire the entire distance. The farthest trip a person could make is that of loving the other. You'd never fully arrive at the destination. You can't pack your bags and get on the plane and arrive and get your bags at the carousel and get in the car and be done with the trip. Instead, the voyage of love is without end. Its distance is ever expanding. To go 1 mile means to open 1,000. And this is a good thing for love, because the givenness of love, the signification of love, is precisely the very definition of saturation, which requires a great distance to live, to experience. But again, the great paradox here is that this distance is opened simply between the one and the other, not the one and the many. But for the human person, The one single other suffices for this distance to open. And in fact, to add a second beloved will cancel the distance. And all the more so to add a third, a fourth, a fifth. The distance is mitigated. Um, the distance is not protracted through promiscuity, but it is prohibited. This is the great paradox of love that Marion is getting at. The personalization of the beloved, the uniqueness of the beloved is irreducible. The erotic reduction lasts as long as I maintain the advance and restart it, avoiding the possession of an object or an end. The other, the beloved, was never a project to complete. This is profound philosophy, I must say. And again, it's informed by Christianity. It's informed by this Judeo-Christian tradition, this covenantal spirituality, and what we have with Jesus, the revelation of God in Jesus, is this manifestation and proclamation of a Messiah, of an anointed one. And even the disciples of John the Baptist ask him about who is this Jesus of Nazareth? Should we be looking for another one? And John the Baptist says, no, he is the one. He is the one. The paradigmatic is the real. You don't need to go looking for another one. You don't need to be looking for something else. And the scene in the Gospel of St. Luke, these two sisters, Martha and Mary, Jesus goes to visit at their home. Their brother is named Lazarus. And Martha is cooking in the kitchen. She's busy cleaning, getting everything ready, situated for their guest, Jesus. And the sister Mary is sitting at his feet, listening to him talk and teach. And she's probably asking him questions. And Martha comes over and says, Jesus, tell Mary to help me. And Jesus says to Martha, 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 you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it shall not be taken from her. And so a scene like that in the Gospels gets at what's called in Latin the unum necessarium, the one thing necessary. The one thing necessary for love is to discover a beloved, a singular beloved. So when we're talking about an erotic relationship in terms of moving toward marriage and that covenantal bond of marriage, which is the basis of the family, it's the basis of procreation, heterosexual monogamous marriage between one man and one woman that commit themselves to this love, to the other for life. They swear to be faithful to the other until death do they part. And so this kind of relationship becomes sacrament in as much as it signifies the unity of love, the oneness of love. That requires a plurality of persons, but two to become one flesh. And as much as there is male, there is female. And the man to become father, the woman to become mother. And so this is the what John Paul II calls the theology of the body. So if we're going to talk about Marion's philosophy of love, this phenomenology of the erotic phenomenon, in the concrete, in the real, what is he really getting at here? Especially a marriage relationship as paradigmatic of the erotic phenomenon. A marriage covenantal sacramental relationship that itself opens the erotic phenomenon through the paradoxical freedom that gives up every other possible relationship like this one, in order to open up um, an atmosphere, an avenue for loving like never before. Because here within the covenant, within the permanence and exclusivity of the relationship, the woman can give herself to the man and the man can give himself to the woman, to the point of abandonment without remainder. And the advance of the lover can proceed without cessation, without collapse, because she's the one, because he's the one, till death. And the fidelity to the one itself uh, is the essential matrix, constellation of signification. That is the golden thread, this fidelity, the oath. And Marion will talk about this later. So we can think then about three characteristics of the lover. Number one, Marion says, the lover bears everything because he risks himself first and last in this amorous loss. The lover bears everything. If only an object faces me, the marker or something, I can't help but move on to the next one. Green? Okay, what about orange? What about black? What about purple? And so with objects, we manipulate them, we move on to the next one all the time. It's the nature of objects. But when we're talking about the beloved, who the lover loves, this is not something you can move on to the next one. When you have found the one, you don't anymore swipe right, swipe left on the app. She's the one, and she is more than enough for this advance of the lover to take its place. If I were to swipe right, swipe left, I lose the advance. I lose the authentic dramatics of love because I'm objectifying the other. I'm saying the infinite is no longer signifying itself through her. The distance to love is no longer recognizable, which is an illusion. It's not true. It's false. Uh, in a careful phenomenological analysis, to love the one is always more than enough. She is perpetually saturating the gift of her personhood, the totality of her personhood, the saturation of her personhood. So the signification of the infinite in her, the givenness of her saturation. There's nothing that will disqualify the qualifications of the singularity of the beloved to be worthy of the advance of the lover over and over again. So the lover always recognizes more than an object before him. And so the lover, bears everything because he risks himself first and last, especially in the covenantal sacramental bond of marriage. He risks himself. He gives himself up. He says, I don't know what the future will hold, but I know the vocation that holds the future, and it is to love. And this gives me all the confidence in the world. So as you ask in the chat, with God all things are possible. The motto of the U.S. state of Ohio, for example, are they referring to people as things like an object? You know, we would say there's a lot of secular institutions that will adopt religious expressions for their own secular purposes. So I don't know who adopted that motto and the reasons they had for adopting it. It always will bear the religious connotation of the Greek New Testament. With God, all things are possible. But that's what Marion is getting at here, is for the lover, all things are possible. All loving is possible in the direction of the beloved. So this is the first point. The second one, the second characteristic of the lover The lover believes and endures everything and lasts without limit or help. Um, the lover believes and endures everything. So this is a reference from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13. Love that believes all things, endures all things, never fails. This, and the Greek word here is agape. Agape. So it's interesting that Marion's book is called the Erotic Phenomenon and not the Agapic Phenomenon. And I asked him about this once, and I think what he was getting at is uh, because it's a project in phenomenology, we begin with the question of the erotic phenomenon, the initiation of the movement of love. Agape, as a Greek concept of love, is it's implied at the outset, but experientially, it's not discovered until later, we might say. And agape itself is the ripe fruit of eros refusing to become lust. So there is a magnetism of love, even proceeding from the involuntary urges of our human nature. There's this erotic phenomenon that is very powerful. But the question is, how are we interpreting it? What do we do with it? And then through the body. But the lover, because of the call of the beloved, believes and endures everything. And the lover and the advance of the lover lasts without limit or a kind of subsidiary help, because love is an ultimate and discovered to be synonymous with the philosophical concept of the absolute. Um, Love is the irreducible phenomenon. This is what Marion is putting forward. That love itself inaugurates all phenomenality. Love itself is the meaning that makes every other meaning meaningful, in as much as it's related back to love. So the lover lasts without limit or help in as much as he advances himself into a distance in which nothing else supports him. So it is necessary that he bear everything and put up with remaining alone in the erotic reduction. So this is very Kierkegaardian and very Nietzschean, Heideggerian, all these kind of philosophers who are admired so much for the solitary courage motif, whether it's the Knight of Faith in Kierkegaard or the authentic design being toward death in Heidegger, or the solitary hero ascending the mountain alone in Nietzsche, and this will to power. What we have here with Marion is a kind of condensation of these courageous motifs of the solitary philosopher who goes against the herd, pursuing the truth, pursuing authentic existence, pursuing critique of the oppressive power structures. Um, we have this now with the erotic reduction and the advance of the lover. The advance of the lover itself is this solitary night of love, especially because the crowd doesn't seem to get it. Uh, the lover remains the idiot, Marion says, the fool of the erotic reduction, and assumes this idiotic solitude as a sovereign privilege. The clown of God, the clown of love, as Jean-Yves Lacoste talks about, the liturgical fool, uh, Christ, Jesus, as this fool par excellence, this pariah, in relation to the masses, in the relation to worldly prestige, honor, privilege, wealth, pleasure, power, all of these things that human beings tend to be concerned with are forfeited by the lover because he has found this pearl of great price, worth more than everything else. It transcends everything else. It enters this entirely new way of being in the world that is unknown to most. And it's experienced as an erotic solitude. So here we have the connection between John Paul II's theology of the body and talking about original solitude that is a prelude to the discovery of the call to communion in love. But this original solitude, that is this condition of possibility for the advance of the lover. He advances because me, myself, and I do not form a communion of persons after all, that he is insufficient unto himself, that he is lonely in this solitude. And so he advances, he sets out to love and discovers this beloved Hava, Eve, mother of all the living, who is different than him, the sexual other, in addition to the general personal other, but the sexual other that completes his own humanity in showing him what he lacks, inscribed in her flesh, expressed through her flesh as the sexual alterity of her soul also. So the lover ends up being the least unhappy in the end. Because he's the one who loved the most, even with the disappearance of the beloved. The lover alone maintains love afloat. So, beginning with the question, can I love first? Marion shows us, yes, the sincerity of love, to make a sincere gift of oneself to the point of abandonment without looking back, without turning to the right or to the left, but to set out. It is enough simply to love, to decide definitively to love first, to love always, to be the first to love, to be the last to love. And this act of loving is sustained by the perpetuity of the signification of the beloved, in which the infinite is both lighting up in personalized givenness, as well as being signified and spoken through an incessant call to be loved, to be affirmed, reinstituted as the beloved again and again and again. I'm reminded of a passage at the end of the Gospel of St. John where, Peter, the head of the apostles, first of all, betrays Jesus 3 times after Jesus had been arrested. And we have the narrative that Peter betrays Jesus 3 times. He's asked by the bystanders, "You're one of his disciples, you know him," and he denies it. He denies even knowing him. And then Jesus, after risen from the dead, appears to Peter, the other apostles, and we have this very interesting scene at the end of the Gospel of St. John where Jesus asks Peter directly, looking him in the eye, "Peter, do you love me?" 3 times Jesus asked Peter about this. And it's very interesting, the original Greek language, the nuances going on there between philia and agape. But in any case, Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And so it is with every beloved is like this. She asks, "Do you love me?" Like in every moment. And the lover is happy to receive the question because he's always ready with, "Yes, you know that I love you." You know that I love you. Even when there's been a failure, there opens the possibility, phenomenologically, for reconciliation, for forgiveness, for mercy. And the relationship, this intrinsic relationship between love and mercy. Because one might worry, asking the question, can I love first? What if there's a kind of a fissure, a fracture in the relationship? What if there's a betrayal? What if there's a backsliding? What if there's an argument? What if there's a disagreement? What if there's a great conflict? What if there's a kind of falling out? What if there's hurt feelings and more? And to still ask the question, but can I love first? Again, again, can I love first? The possibility remains. Yes, I can love first every time. So the lover believes, endures everything, and lasts without limit or help. The lover uh, has lost nothing because he still remains a lover. So this is a great paradox. By losing everything, the lover still has lost nothing in as much as he loves. Because to love um, is uh, to embrace the whole, through the synecdoche of the beloved. That's tremendous. This is, I'm thinking Hans Urs von Balthasar, Ganze im Fragment, the whole revealed in the fragment, the whole signified, the total, the whole of the infinite, the whole of the absolute, the wholeness of the truth. All of this is channeled through the call of the beloved, asking the lover, do you love me? Uh, yes, mercy, grace, humility, as you say, these important terms in the chat. Thinking about the distinctions between these things and yet the complementarity of meanings that we have here. The symphony, the symphonics of truth, to use another phrase of Balthasar. Truth is symphonic. And so the lover loses nothing in as much as he still remains a lover. To the last to love wins the stake. So it's like uh, it's like a teacher asking the children, okay, so who wants to be the first to love? All the hands should go up. Okay, now who wants to be the last to love? All the hands should go up. This is what Marion is getting at. To desire to be the first to love as well as the last to love, and that this would be one's deepest desire. To have the courage to ask the question again and again, can I be the first to love? The lover loves to love for the love of love. So Marion will have some rhetorical flourishes here with this language of love. The lover loves to love for the love of love. But it's always, for Marion, a love personalized. It's not like a Kantian categorical imperative or Levinasian responsibility for the other. Marion is very personalized, always thinking about the uniqueness of this other here in front of me, and that the advance of the lover lights up the uniqueness of the beloved. This is the other great benefit and requirement for the beloved to keep coming into view. It's because of the steadfastness of the intentionality of loving. Yeah, and so love for the sake of love is a much more saturating vocation than art for the sake of art, as you say, but a similar kind of idea. But to love for the sake of love, it's not a generic love. It's not an anonymous love for Marion. It's a very specified, personalized, um, incommunicable uniqueness of the beloved that I am loving. but to love without knowing or possessing. The beauty of a loving relationship, like Marion is outlining through phenomenological description, is that I never tire of getting to know my beloved. I want to know more about her. I want to know more about her life when she was a child and growing up, and the different things she did, and what she still likes to do for fun, and what she would like to do today. And I want to keep asking her more questions. She doesn't bore me. She doesn't exhaust me. In fact, she herself sustains my advance in her direction by simply her own personalized givenness, by just being her, so to speak. She continues to provoke my advance of love. And so I never understand myself to possess her as some property, as some what some people talk about, arm candy or something like this. It's like there's something so much more saturating that's possible here. And it has to do with relationship. And even when the relationship is put to the test through something like an accident, health issues, imperfections in the other, things that might annoy you that the other does just kind of involuntarily. But all of these things about the beloved, uh, in a sense, contribute to even more worthiness of being loved, because love does its best work in spite of any alleged obstacles that present themselves in the distance between the other and the self, especially the trying times of suffering, suffering together. The very meaning of compassion, compassio, to suffer with the other, is the greatest act of love. To love the other, to suffer with the other, for the other, but not in a way that one wants to detach and run away from. But it's, yes, I love you this much, and no suffering can get in between us, and no suffering can collapse this erotic reduction. Suffering itself spurs it on. Suffering itself elevates the possibilities of the erotic phenomenon to their highest pitch, their highest potentialities. Um, just yesterday, I was revisiting the story Beauty and the Beast, and I'm struck by this tale in many ways, but kind of the moral of the story, that the advance of Beauty in relation to the beast, the advance of her love for the beast, that obviously is not a natural attraction. It's not that he's so handsome that she wants to marry him, but it's out of the sense of an obligation that she senses to responsibility for her father, for her sisters, um, her whole family, and an obligation she has to the beast as she gets to know the beast. And he asks her over and over, uh, would you marry me? And she says, no, beast, I don't want to marry you. I don't want to marry you. But in the end, but all the while she's having this apparition of this prince, this human, handsome, charming prince. And it's like the apparition itself, again, is the signification. All the while it's coming from the beast. The beast has beloved. And all she has to do is say yes to love him. And his whole countenance transforms. No longer is he the beast. He is the Prince Charming that he was all along. And this is what Marion is getting at with the advance of the lover, has the power to make manifest what was being manifest, being given long ago. about the beloved. It's not that the lover itself creates the beauty in the beloved, but simply unveils it. This is what Marion is getting at in this book, The Erotic Phenomenon. Tremendous philosophical work, the 21st century. So, Beauty and the Beast is she beautifies the beauty already giving itself in the beast. And it's because of her advance, because her advance doesn't let up. And that's the temptation all along in the story, that there would be a pulling away from the call of the beloved in one way or another. But in as much as the advance of the lover remains, the story goes on, and they live happily ever after. And that signification at the end of the narrative of so many paradigmatic narratives like Cinderella, what is it's the testimony of the infinite. It's the self-attestation of the infinite. Ultimately, usually there's a marriage at the end, and the husband and wife, live happily ever after, because what we have on display in this covenantal marriage relationship, uh, through the sexual complementarity of the man and the woman, is the infinite hermeneutics of the gift, as Marion would call it. The gift unveils and unfurls an infinite hermeneutics, infinite possibilities of the gift in its play, in its circulation. And we don't think it tragic that they lived happily ever after, because we're keenly aware of this sensibility of love and all the loving yet left to be done, the loving to be done into eternity. Love is a phenomenon that's rooted in eternity, that's rooted in the infinite, as we read in the Song of Songs in the Hebrew scriptures. This love that is strong as death, fiercer than Sheol, than the grave. The love that refuses that the beloved go out of existence. But the love of the lover that through the advance makes the beloved remain. And this is the very premise of eternal life and salvation in Jesus and his resurrection and what's revealed in him. Is it is the love that never fails. It is the unconditional love of God for the creature that will not stop, that cannot stop, that will love into eternity, because God loves first and loves last. And to love last is to love first, over and over again. So God always will be loving each one of us as if for the first time. And that's the very meaning of eternal life with God, to be loved in this way. And the whole point of this life is to discover that gift more than anything else. If one has discovered that gift, one has found, as we read in the Gospels, Jesus talking about these parables, the pearl of great price, the treasure hidden in the fields, the lost coin. Love is the only thing, because love is everything. So the lover testifies to the infinite resources of love. To love without knowing or possessing, unknowing and poverty themselves indicate the properly infinite excess of the lover. It's like the lover doesn't need all this stuff, doesn't need all this bling bling, all this wardrobe, all these things money can buy, because he's rich in love. And he's found the one thing that really matters more than anything made of matter. And he puts his own matter, his own body, at the service of this vocation. to the end, to the end. Um, and and so in this agnostic situation of the lover, where he doesn't know what the future holds, but he knows what sustains the future, what holds the future, and that is the advance of love. He's not concerned about bad weather. He's not concerned about losing all his fortunes, like Job. Job, a premier lover in the Hebrew scriptures. He continues to love to the end. And he realizes that the wealth of love transcends the economy of exchange of dollars. The third characteristic of the lover. So the lover loves without seeing and loves better without seeing. So this is really interesting. I find in the work of Marion, for him to say something like this, his phenomenology that's driven so much by visual language, manifestation, apparition, visibility, light, illumination. But this is something more radical in the lover, that the lover loves without seeing and loves better without seeing. And okay, so we can think about this very concretely in terms, let's think of a married couple, a man and a woman. And the band Coldplay has this song, Sky Full of Stars. And one of the lyrics is, you get brighter the more it gets dark. And I really love that lyric, and it applies directly to what Marion is saying here, that the lover loves without seeing and loves better without seeing. That is to say, the beloved gets brighter the more it gets dark for the lover. And concretely, in a marriage relationship, say in the conjugal act, is this not happening best in the dark, in the thick of the dark, when touch becomes more prominent than seeing, when the autoaffectivity of the flesh is heightened because there's the wonderful chiaroscuro, the light and the darkness intersecting in the intersection of flesh as gift, not just as some biological phenomena, though these things are happening with the body involuntarily, but what's happening at the level of the voluntary, the advance of the lover, continuing to advance without respite, saying, I love you in and through the flesh. I receive your love in and through the flesh, to the point of abandonment. You get brighter the more it gets dark. So the lover loves without seeing and loves better without seeing. It's a different kind of sensation happening here, the sensation of signification, not just visual data, audible data, smell, taste, touch, but a kind of signification that is being proclaimed, and also a givenness that's being manifest in and through the unity of the lover and the beloved through a great intimacy. But the conjugal act in marriage only consummates what's always being signified in the relationship through the oath, through the consent in the liturgical celebration of this new, unique covenantal union. So to love as a departure from the world of objects and beings, in order to open the distance through detachment, dispossession, where the abandon without return may begin. So it's beautiful language of Marion. He uses this language of abandonment very often, and it's like a crescendo in his writing. to the point of abandonment. And I love to use this phrase also because abandonner, it has the language of gift within the concept. It has the language of the gifted, la donner in French, the one who is given this givenness within the lived experience. But abandonment, to give up definitively, to the highest degree. The lover knows something or someone only by loving it. This is what we're seeing here. And the lover loves best through detachment, dispossession, to the point of abandonment without return or remainder. And abandonment is necessary for this heightened experience of love. If I love only as far as I ask what's in it for me, what am I going to get? How is it going to satisfy my needs? I don't love like um, this courageous lover who loves to the point of abandonment. I think it's a really interesting thing to ask ourselves within the realm, the scope of our lived experience. Reflecting back through memory, have I loved to the point of abandonment? What experiences have those been? What possibilities remain in my life to loving to the point of abandonment, where I give myself up, I exhaust myself through this advance of the lover that is dealing with a love that is never exhausted, but the spirit is willing and the flesh is weak, as Jesus says. So how do I love to the point of exhaustion? Perhaps through parenthood, through work, through study, through serving people in desperate need, through forfeiting concern over prestige and honor and reputation and accolades and gathering up pleasures and monies, things money can buy. How much have I forfeited for the sake of love? How much of my stuff, my ousia, have I put at the service of love? This is a great question to ask in a kind of examination of conscience. So just a couple more points about the lover. The lover privileges neither being nor visibility, since the lover loves in order to make appear. The lover loves in order to let give. So the intentionality of love opens the S-gift of the phenomenon. The givenness of the phenomenon comes. The advent of the phenomenon comes through the intentionality of love, the advance of the lover. And it's not a question of being or visibility at first, because it's the lover himself who, in loving, makes appear the givenness of the beloved, the possibilities of love that remain within the relationship. And it's ultimately not a matter of possession, but a matter of letting give. We could say love sets free the gift the gift to love more. The advance of the lover, the intentionality of love, is setting free the freedom to love. So there's definitely a difference within the concept of freedom between free will, that yes, I can choose this or that, but freedom, a freedom that's lived into by choosing wisely, by choosing responsibly, and above all, by choosing to love. Love opens a lifestyle of freedom. And it's characterized, yes, by responsibility, by keeping one's promises, by living the oath that one swears. For example, within the covenantal bond of marriage, this is all. It's why this relationship is so powerful, because so much is in loving. So thank you for the comment. So a wounded soul healed through love. Yes. So if your enemy won't love you, then to love the other, so love exists, is a self-serving act. A hermeneutic of suspicion might interpret that way. But I think what Marion is getting at is the meaning of sacrifice, where there's not an expectation of reward, but there's simply a fulfillment of a vocation, of a call, that's oriented not around the self, but around the other. So this is an important point. But I think your comment does help us raise questions about uh, the ego in the work of Marion. And I think this is where we need the work of Levinas to come and tug a bit at what can be some egocentric descriptions, even when talking about love. So, but for Marion, it's important that we continue to understand that the power of the self to love comes from the elsewhere of the lover, of the beloved, and that it's not that the ego from his own resources is loving and advancing this love without ceasing. It's because the elsewhere remains elsewhere, abides as the elsewhere, even the exteriority within the interiority of the self, the elsewhere within the here of the self, is provoking the love, is provoking the love. So it's not so much that I can take credit for loving so well. To give credit where credit is due, I have to point back to the elsewhere and to say thank you for letting me love. Ultimately to God. Yes. So thank you for this comment. So the lover loves in order to let give, opens the fiat of the freedom of the gift, which is unconditional. The purity of the gift in Marion's phenomenological description, when we read in his book Being Given, toward a phenomenology of givenness, he gives us a very convincing phenomenological depiction of the gift as such that escapes an economy of exchange and routinizing of reciprocity. So the lover loves always in hope, since hope signifies what one does not possess, nor even hopes to possess. So this is a hope against hope, and we read about this in St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 4, verses 16 to 22, where this expression Marion pulls from. So thinking about Abraham and Sarah, and their faith in God, their faith in this vocation to go, to leave where they were living, to go to a new land God would show them, and a promise of descendants, a promise of the fruit of faith and love in the descendant, who will, between Abraham and Sarah, be Isaac. So St. Paul writes, for this reason, it depends on faith, so that it may be a gift, and the promise may be guaranteed to all his descendants, not to those who only adhere to the law, but to those who follow the faith of Abraham, who is the father of all of us. As it is written, I have made you father of many nations. He, Abraham, is our father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into being what does not exist. He believed, hoping against hope, that he would become the father of many nations, according to what was said, thus shall your descendants be. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body as already dead, for he was almost 100 years old, and the dead womb of Sarah. He did not doubt God's promise in unbelief. Rather, he was empowered by faith and gave glory to God, and was fully convinced that what he had promised, he was also able to do. That is why it was credited to Abraham as righteousness. So with Abraham and Sarah, we have this intentionality of faith. In Marion's erotic phenomenon, we can apply this as a kind of intentionality of love that hopes against hope. We could say the infinite hope that hopes against finite hope. Uh, to hope against the hope of possession, the hope of dispossession that hopes against the hope of possession. This is a hope against hope that's meant here. So, because to possess the beloved like an object would end in jealousy. Rather, the beloved is destined to unfold in her belovedness infinitely into eternity. So when I try to possess the beloved, this is where I become possessive of the beloved. I become jealous, and I start treating her like my property, and I'm going to defend that property. So it's a careful thing to be able to love within this freedom of the gift that renounces regarding the other like a possession, like an object, like my car, my house, my furniture, my clothes. Um, so it's something quite different. Hope against hope that deflects the temptation to jealousy. The Marion will talk later about jealousy's honor in a different sense, but for now, I think we can understand what this means. Love can only come upon me if I renounce possessing it. The gift remains a gift as long as it's not regarded as a possession. The gift keeps on giving to the degree that I let it circulate. So, love is a gift that I receive to the measure that I give it away, that I don't hoard it, that I'm not miserly about it and say, my love, my stuff, my usia. But again, through this process of kenosis, this usia that is even involving my own flesh, my own body, becomes the parousia of the lover, of the advance of the lover, of the presence of the lover, of the self-donating movement of the other toward the beloved. So, therefore, love must remain unconditioned, essentially unconditioned, and only unconditioned, and only on this condition. So it's a beautiful paradox Marion puts into words. Love must remain unconditioned and only on this condition. The only condition of love is that it remain unconditioned, in other words. Great paradox. That it has none. Love has no conditions. Genuine love, the fullness of love, the wholeness of love, the full saturating power of love means with no condition. To love absolutely, irrevocably, to the point of abandonment. That the love of the lover in his solitude, it's a love that gives itself infinitely by assisting possibility. The possibility of the lover in his solitude, whose very weakness makes his strength, and whence comes his advance. So, the more that the lover, arrives upon the island of love and burns all his ships, everything else, every possibility of evacuating this mission to love unconditionally as much as possible, the better the lover loves. The more he can give up, the more he can forfeit, the better he loves. And we can recall here concretely in human experience, what might this look like? For Catholic Christianity, we have something called the evangelical counsels. Evangelical counsels are three things, three characteristics of a lifestyle that is entered into. And I've talked about them in a previous live stream. These things that counteract the logic of concupiscence, the logic of lust, the logic of suspicion, poverty, chastity, and obedience. So it's possible for a human being to take vows to live this way. In Catholicism, it's called religious life. And so, like the Dominicans, Franciscans, and mendicant kind of orders, Carmelites, um, I think Jesuits take all the vows. Um, I know diocesan priests don't take a vow of poverty per se, but people in religious life, Benedictines, monastic life is this for sure. Mendicant life is this. Religious life, as it's called. Also, consecrated life, secular institutes. There's a variety of forms it takes within Catholicism. But what's common among these different forms of consecrated life is the three evangelical councils. And so, if what Marion is saying is true, concretely, this form of life would open up the floodgates to love, like Marion is saying, is possible. This, and also, the sacramental bond of marriage, um, as well. What I've been talking about along the way, but to get at the extreme of these characteristics would mean to take vows to live in voluntary poverty till death, chastity, meaning self-mastery, but implied is foregoing marriage to live a celibate lifestyle to death, and obedience, by joining a religious order or community, being obedient to the leadership of that community to do what is required for the common good of the community and the common good of the church. And so, what is a person sacrificing? Um, in poverty, it's renouncing money and material goods as the highest kind of goods. One in religious life doesn't have one's own bank account and wallet or purse. You live in community, you take a vow of poverty, and you don't have hardly anything. Chastity, through this self mastery, foregoing marriage, and even dealing with the involuntary sexual urge in such a way that recognizing this involuntary urge is signifying the urge of the lover to advance in love, love for God above all, but also love for neighbor. And a great paradox happens in religious life where the one religious person can serve many people as beloved, inasmuch as there was a renunciation of the exclusivity of the good of sacramental covenantal marriage. But then there's we could say, a propagation, a proliferation of service and the advance of the lover in many directions, in a very disinterested way. And then obedience, to sacrifice one's will, the sense of my free will as an ultimate, or interpreting free will itself as freedom to uh, to forfeit my free will, and so thereby paradoxically to enter this fullness of freedom, where my freedom is synonymous with that of the other, that of the community, that of the church. And so someone in religious life who makes promises or an oath swearing to live according to these evangelical counsels makes a final profession of religious vows that would include these things. Benedictines also take a vow of stability, promising to remain at the same monastery unless they're transferred out of obedience. But these kind of vows, they're very countercultural things in relation to something like money or sexual pleasure, or a kind of freedom of forming and dissolving different relationships. being able to do what I want, when I want, however I want, in my own time, according to my own desires. Obedience, it's a whole different thing. And these evangelical counsels reflect the phenomenological description of love that Marion is putting forward in his book, The Erotic Phenomenon. So I just want to point this out. And so we have the two paradoxical lifestyles that correspond to this phenomenological description. One I've been talking about along the way, covenantal, sacramental, monogamous, heterosexual marriage between one man and one woman, and religious life, the three evangelical counsels: poverty, chastity, and obedience. So, when discerning one's own personal vocation, these are really helpful things to think about as possible for a person. If you're not married, um, could you be called to this, to love radically through these evangelical counsels? It's a wonderful thing to consider. And I'm just struck by the paradox of the concrete lifestyle associated with um, these possibilities opening up so fully. Um, so just a couple last points for this live stream today. Thank you all for joining me. If you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to like the video, to make comments after it's published. If you're not already a subscriber, I invite you to subscribe to get updated on all these new live streams coming out almost every day, and future projects. So what we want to think about finally is just to sum all this up, and thinking with Marion in his book, again, The Erotic Phenomenon. To sum this up, these themes of today, the lover who again bears everything, believes everything, and loves without seeing. This freedom of the lover moves into an intuition that itself renounces assurance. So if you've been following along with my commentary on the erotic phenomenon, a big deal earlier on in the book was Marion talking about the lover doesn't seek epistemological certainty, but seeks the assurance, first of all, of being loved, which was the first question: does anybody out there love me? But being disappointed in the lack of affirmative response and the contradictions that happen when asking that question. We move on to a more precise question for the ego: can I love first? And there comes the assurance that yes, I can. I can love first. And as much as there is a beloved to love, there's much loving to be done. So I'm assured of the vocation when I reflect on it for just a little while. But as the lover gets into the advance, Marion is radicalizing the erotic reduction and saying the lover no longer is seeking assurance that he can love, that he did love, that he can still love. He's simply confidently loving. And there's evidence of the loving in the amorous loss. It's quite different than saying, sometimes we might ask a question: how much is he worth? How much is she worth? Meaning, how much money does he or she have? Or if someone goes to invest money, they might be asked, what do you have? What are your assets? And your savings, your stocks, your mutual funds, your 401k, your retirement, what's all the stuff you have? The principal in your house or your possessions, add it all up. What do you have? And that kind of gives a net worth of financial potency of the person. But for love, and the logic of love, it's completely the opposite. To know what the lover is worth, to know the degree of the love of the lover, is asking, how much have you lost? Have you gone bankrupt with all the things of the world? If you haven't gone bankrupt, you have a lot of loving left to do. You have a lot of love to still learn about. So Marion is saying to love to the point of abandonment is to become bankrupt with the things of this world. And who knows? It could be literally for some people, and they're trying to help other people out, and you could say, squander all of their resources. There's a kind of prodigality and exorbitance of the lover that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, to quote the words of Jesus again. But in any case, we want to bring back in responsibility probably somewhere along the line with this, and that's where Levinas is going to be important as a rejoinder to Marion's work, and I think to bring a bit more phenomenological balance to the analysis, interpretation, and forthcoming conclusions. So, but in any case, the lover is not even preoccupied with the assurance that what he is doing um, he can continue to do or that he did. He hopes against hope that he has been loving, he will continue to love, but he has long forgotten about the quest for epistemological certainty, for financial stability and security, and for any assurance that would certify that he actually has been loving. Because what stands highest, again to quote Heidegger, what stands higher than actuality for phenomenology and an erotic reduction would be possibility. So possibility is its own assurance, again, an unconditional kind of loving that is not depending on any other um, third party certification or assurance. Um, and that's also exciting about love is it doesn't need to be certified by anyone other than, in the end, the beloved. But for the advance of the lover, her yes or her no doesn't even serve to certify that loving has been done, that the gift has been made, that her belovedness is the elsewhere that activates the love in her direction. But all that matters for the lover and the advance of the lover is that a gift is being given, and not that it's being certified or assured. It's not taking it to the post office and getting paying for um, uh, the certification that it was delivered, but just that it was mailed is enough. Yeah, everyone's possibility matrix is uniquely different, and as much as every beloved is unique. So there's something universal that's being said about the phenomenology of love, but at the same time, the paradox involves a most concentrated particularity of the beloved and the lover who loves the beloved. So the particular matrix is different, but the universal one is held in common in a global sense. So thank you all again for joining this live stream. If you have questions, comments, you can feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to wrap it up here in just a minute or two. But it's the decision of the lover, Marion says, that assurances are renounced in the decision itself. So when I respond to the question, can I love first? Yes, and I will. Assurances are renounced at that point. The decision itself, and this is where, I wonder how close is Marion running to Nietzsche in some of this. When I think back on his book Prolegomena to Charity, I feel there's some of this here. It's a real emphasis on the will, and And so love, even for St. Thomas Aquinas, in a metaphysical sense, love concerns the will, and knowledge concerns the intellect. And Marion is very much concentrating on the phenomenality of the will, not a will to power like in Nietzsche, but it's a will to love. But what he's saying here is so radical that the will to love itself and the decision to love does away with all certainties and all assurances. And so there's a great purity of the will here that I do feel gets similar to Nietzsche. Um, I'd like to think about that more. But in any case, the decision to love, and even further, to love as if I loved, um, thus overcoming the hermeneutics of suspicion. And this is where I know in Prolegomena to Charity, Marion talks about overcoming like the Nietzschean suspicion about loving, that it's not for the sake of power, or overcoming a Freudian suspicion. It's not for the sake of pleasure, or overcoming a Marxian suspicion. It's not for the sake of possessing the beloved or more material goods as a kind of product of the loving. But instead, to love as if I loved. So the as if is a great phenomenological concept too. It gets back to the Heideggerian phenomenological this uh, as such, but at the same time, as if is continuing to open the possibility not only of loving into the future, but as if I have already loved too. So to live as if I have loved, as if I can still love. And so it all depends on the lover not being assured from anywhere else. And this is where I would say Marion is very Kierkegaardian too. This night of faith, uh, you know, laying on a raft in the middle of the ocean in solitude, and all I have is myself. And I'm not looking for any other assurance. It depends on me. So, Aleister Crowley's philosophy about the will, yeah, I think there can be some connections here. And so when we think about this, phenomenology is very careful not to try to speak too metaphysically. And the concept of the will is always bound up with desire in phenomenology, always bound up with many other things. And so it's hard to isolate the will in phenomenology. But I think what Marion is doing here is something along these lines, where he's emphasizing so much on decision without assurances, that he's really trying to exercise the phenomenological reduction about the phenomenon of the will, and decision, um, which we can evaluate after the fact. I think this is where I love coming back to Levinas, because my concern, with an emphasis so much on the will, we could quickly start to interpret freedom again as the free will itself, and the essence of freedom is that power to decide, the power to choose. And I don't think that in itself signifies the fullness of freedom. So this is where I think the Levinasian pulling at the egoism that's typical in philosophy, though Marion is relying a lot on the concept of alterity and otherness in Levinas to drive this philosophy of love. This is why Levinas shies away from the terminology of love, because I think Levinas is afraid it can become bound up in this egoism again, as if the ethical imperatives start to rest too much on the self and what the self decides they are, what the self decides to do with them. So for Levinas, the ethical depends completely on the other, the call of the other, the asymmetrical relationship with the other. And the language Levinas prefers is responsibility for the other rather than loving the other. But again, responsibility without love can be very dry, anonymous, generic, and impersonal. And that's what Marion is trying to recuperate in this philosophy of love. Love as first philosophy is that we want to make sure that responsibility involves facing a particular face of a unique other with a particular name, and that matters too. Not just responsible for the generic personal other, but to be responsible and to love this specific, unique, special other in front of me here. So I think that's equally important what Marion is doing, but we can see the tendencies with each one, Marion and Levinas, that their philosophy can collapse um, to an extreme. So I think to bring the two together in a dialectical reduction that's at once erotic, donative, vocative, um, Mario and Levinas together gives us a much fuller picture of lived experience and phenomenality. So to answer this question, um, is there an ontological distinction between magic and the supernatural? Yes, definitely. Um, I don't know really metaphysically what magic means. Um, Whereas supernatural, I know metaphysically what that means. It concerns divinity directly. Um, Magic, perhaps as a general definition of a term, involves illusion between that's performed by creatures. And so it's the illusion of the supernatural and the natural. Whereas for the supernatural per se has to do with divinity and the acts of divinity. Magic, the occult, okay, there's demons, which from a human perspective, we could regard angels as kind of supernatural beings, finite, pure, spiritual, personal beings. Um, Unlike us, they don't have material bodies. So there's a sense of a supernatural difference between an angel and a human. But in magic, if there's things happening physically or in terms of appearance, so much magic works through illusion. In general, a magic show tends to exploit illusion, and so it is with temptation and deception and all of this. So magic doesn't really have a place in theology per se, except as perhaps an imitation of the supernatural or mockery of the supernatural, a kind of red herring of the supernatural, misdirection of the supernatural, and it's not interesting. It's not interesting because it's filled with um, a counterfeit um, supernatural. This we see throughout Scripture, the differences between acts of God and acts of demons. Only God can act as God. Only God can love as God. God is the supernatural. By definition, there is no other. So that's how I might begin to answer that question, but it's really interesting to think about. So thank you all so much for joining in this live stream on Jean-Luc Marion, Erotic Phenomenology, and the Advance of the Lover. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to more live streams to come. May you continue to think toward the whole, to pray from the heart, and to live as a witness. We'll see you in the next one.